Hello, this is Jeff Nyquist with another edition of Friends and Enemies. With me is my co-host Alex Benesch, and we're going to talk today about the election, how you can screw it up, the U.S. election, that is. Ben Swann's taking money from the Russians, uh, how Trump did in his Joe Rogan interview, and Elon Musk's game, and of course the Israeli attack on Iran, what that may mean, what Iran is going to do next, whether there is a connection between that and the mobilizations in North Korea and the Korea Russia Friendship Treaty, and of course possible mobilizations in China, Chinese naval units being out there, and also working with Russian naval units. So there's a lot to cover today. And Alex, how did you want to start? You wanted to talk about Rogan first?
Yeah, let's talk about the election and the influencers influencing the election in various ways. Some of it could even be sabotage. It's like this frenemy phenomenon when somebody says,
Friendly sabotage?
Yeah, I'm a biggest Trump supporter ever, and I'm gonna save the election from being stolen, and then they do the exact wrong things before, during, and after. Yeah, before, Trump during, and after the election, and they just praise themselves forever for all days to come.
Rogan didn't smoke pot with Trump on his interview, did he?
No, they didn't. that would have broken the internet for sure. That didn't happen. So it's like there's all kinds of influencers out there, and they have all kinds of different motivations. They have all different levels of understanding, and they're getting more powerful. Yeah, right. So obviously the Democrats, they have decided to run with this whole Trump is a fascist bit, because that's kind of the marketing. That's kind of what they decided in these meetings, in these internal meetings. Okay, this is just the most basic stuff that we can come up with. Let's run with that.
Even though Joseph Schumpeter told us that Marxism and leftism in practice turns out to be fascism.
Yeah, and also, honestly, what head of state? I'm talking serious countries here, real countries here. What head of state hasn't made some joke internally, or hasn't made some exasperated comment at some point internally? Man, this job would be easier if I had total control, if I could just give orders and everything would everybody would follow these orders. The American system is the American system, especially with the Republicans. It's not built like the Democrats are claiming it's built. It's a republic. It has many people, moving parts. It's a system. It's built for redundancy. There's not like this one guy coming in from the casino business and media business and some other business. It's not this one guy coming in and says, I want to be a dictator, and he's a dictator. This is not America.
Did you see the Bill Maher interview with Megyn Kelly?
No, I didn't catch that.
She read him the riot act about calling Trump a fascist. She really did. And, and he's trying to insist that, well, he's a Hitler. Hitler was good at first. Nobody thought Hitler was a Hitler until 1940s. It's like, what are you talking about? Night of the Long Knives, the Enabling Act in 1933, the burning of the Reichstag. What are you talking about? They didn't think Hitler was Hitler in the 1930s. What are they talking about? But they want to try to fit Trump into the Hitler mode, which is so strange, because there's nothing Hitler-like about Trump.
Yeah, it's like this unfair situation where the Republicans, they have to be the adults in the room. They have to have the security experts. They gotta be tough. Foreign and domestic when they're dealing with issues. And so this is kind of like how you get a bad rap. You get this bad marketing thrown against you if you have to maintain security. And then it's always this leftist argument. There's this lingering fascism thing. It's always lingering fascism. And
as far as fascism, what was more fascistic? The Biden administration's reaction to January 6th, which was much closer to trying to turn it into it's an insurrection. We have to arrest hundreds of people arrested and Nixon against their rights.
And let's get real. Nixon didn't Nixon didn't create a dictatorship. Reagan didn't create a dictatorship.
No.
Not Bush Senior, not Bush Junior, not some.
Republicans are fascists.
Yeah, and you can go back in history even more. You go back one Republican president after the other. It's just a well-oiled machine. And sometimes it has to be a very tough machine because it's hard to be a republic when the rest of the world is going crazy. So this is kind of what they've been running with. And then you get these influencers, and they're saying they're doing this for the good of the country. They say they're the biggest Trump supporters. They want to save America. But then they do all these.
They're doing God's work.
Yeah,
but Marx.
they're just shooting themselves and everybody else in the knee from every possible angle imaginable. And the question is, why? Is it that they're in it for themselves? They just want to be popular? They want to be noticed? Is it they're too close to the Russians and they actually take Russian money? And sometimes
you would be surprised at how many people are taking money
and
from China or Russia,
sometimes it just seems like sabotage. Not only sabotaging Trump while pretending to be a Trump supporter. Sometimes it's just about sabotaging America, because at some point, if you're paid for sabotage, right? If you're aligned with the Russians, you don't necessarily care who wins the race in America. You just care about the level of chaos you can create. So, and now these influencers, they've become so powerful. It's like they're more powerful than television stations. They're more powerful sometimes than many politicians, actually. And it's like, are we still understanding what the problem here is? I mean, if you have any sort of actual job or any responsible job, you're a firefighter, you're a police officer, you're a teacher, you work in tech, you work in security, you have to know your stuff, and you have to have experience and training and get things right. But in this day and age, almost anybody can be an influencer. Anybody can shoot up to this great level of fame. And now we see that some influencers, these influencers may actually tip the scale. And they could actually cause or contribute to Trump and the Republican Party winning. Now, of course, it would be nice if the Republicans win.
I just want to ask you a question. Did you hear about this testimony of Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, that Jordan
about
Peterson
Tucker and Jordan Peterson?
Tucker Carlson had taken money from Russia? What do you think of
so
that?
it's like, well, either, and I'm speculating here, of course, so either he was not exactly remembering right what's already proven in public and what's not proven in public. Maybe he just fumbled things in his mind, or maybe this was sort of a Freudian slip. He was maybe letting on more than what's already in the public sphere. So this could mean different things. So it's like maybe they know more than they previously admitted in the government over there. Or this was just, he misspoke. Maybe he slightly misspoke. He maybe have remembered something wrong. But, we have to understand that this guy has one of the highest security clearances in the world. And so we've seen so many other people who...
Mr. Trudeau?
Yeah, I mean, he's got access to
Prime
everything.
Minister of Canada, and they're part of this bigger alliance where they share all.
Yeah, and I say it's like, and almost every day, almost every week, somebody gets busted, right? Somebody gets
It's
or
really
semi-busted,
isn't it? It's so easy for the Russians, it seems to me, to hand out money to idiots on the right, and to have these idiots basically not understand that Russia is an enemy country.
And how dangerous the spy game actually is. And it goes back to this whole problem that we've described over the course of this show. The last year plus, it's like there's so many people have forgotten about the spy game and the Cold War level spy game, or many people have never even learned it. Yeah, some people have never even learned it because they're too young. I mean, I'm 40 and I barely remember the 80s as a small child. So if you never actually consciously were connected to this time back then, and you never learn about it, you don't understand how dangerous the spy game is, and how what a double life actually means if you can get caught and you constantly have to watch your back.
I remember sitting with a Russian defector, more than 20 years ago, where we were at his hotel room and the door was cracked open and he had me sitting so I could see anybody coming this way. And he was sitting behind the door because he was that afraid of being assassinated while I was with him. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, that's no joke.
Yeah, it's like
because they wanted to kill this guy.
exactly, and
Right?
it's like, and I'm telling some, in my German show when I talk about these heavy hitter influencer types over here that are just so pro Russia, and they got filmed by Czech intelligence receiving packages in a car from Russian guys. It's like, and I tell these, and I say to people, this is more dangerous than you think, because if you get in bed with the Russians, they tell you everything you want to hear. They tell you, oh, don't worry, by the time the Anglos have caught up with you, by the time they will actually come after you, we will get you a warning and we will get you out. There's an exfiltration plan. Don't worry, you'll sit in a plane real fast. You're going to end up in Moscow or St. Petersburg. You'll be fine. We'll treat you like a hero. You get the red carpet treatment and the lobster. And everything's going to be fine. But it doesn't always work that way. And we talked about in this show about some famous cases, Germans and others.
Shades of Snowden.
Well, we talked about some cases where people, they had to spend 10 years in a really bad prison before they got prison swapped. That's not pretty. And when you finally get swapped, you have to live in Russia. You have to learn the language. You're not as important to them anymore, and they don't let you leave. And at some point, you may want to get home. You may want to get traveling rights, but they don't give that to you. They will gladly see you turn into an alcoholic and die, supposed hero of the Russian Federation. They would rather see you die from alcoholism than, escape from them again. And
Why
then
not? It's a very Russian tradition.
yeah, and then when this whole thing heats up, with the Koreans and the Chinese and the war becomes bigger and bigger, the spy game is going to become more dangerous. So, depending on how much you have betrayed your respective country, depending on how much of a traitor you've become, you may one day wake up in a special interrogation center. This is just how it goes if you go that hard. If you risk.
And by the way, this applies. The countries that are really being heavily infiltrated right now: Mexico, Canada. I think your country, Germany, has been heavily infiltrated. Italy is the other heavily infiltrated country in Europe by the Russians.
Yeah.
When I say Mexico and Canada, I'm meaning mostly Russians. Of course, the Russian mafia is in both countries. The Russian mafia kind of is a master mafia of the Mexican mafias and cartels. But the Chinese, in terms of numbers, Mexico is crawling with Chinese. And there are rumors that the U.S. government has discovered that China is importing heavy weapons into Mexico now. That the Mexican government is really aligned with China now, secretly. That Canada, there are huge numbers of Chinese in Canada, over 1 million Chinese in Canada that are loyal to China. 1.6 million Chinese that are loyal to China that have come to Canada in the last several years, last decade. And that's a very serious problem. If you can infiltrate people who are your agents and maybe paramilitaries, maybe even, People's Liberation Army reservists into Canada, into Mexico, you can form armies in those countries. If you capture the government, look at the government in Mexico. They are not exactly anti-communist, anti-socialist. They're not exactly the same thing with Trudeau. His family was friendly with the Soviets and the Cubans, and now the Chinese. I mean, when I was in Toronto, I heard Canadians, well-connected Canadians, saying the Trudeau family is a Chinese CCP family, connected family. So here you have on either side of the United States, we got an even longer border with Canada than we have with Mexico. What is with this? We're being surrounded on our own continent. When General Laura Richardson of Southern Command saying the Chinese and Russians are moving into Latin America, taking it over. This is
and it's one thing, to force ideas and plans onto people. That's a massive undertaking to force people to behave a certain way, to think a certain way. But it's a different kind of undertaking to influence people in a way so that they think it's their idea. It's really your idea, but they think they made the decision. They put the pieces together in their head, and this is a very, very dangerous game. And so now we're looking at these influencers right before the election. Some of these influencers are outright crazy. So they're saying Trump, they're claiming to be very conservative, but they're saying that you should never vote for Trump for this, that, or the other reason, and they come up with anything really. And you're wondering what their ideas, what their plan is.
Let the communists win, but don't say they're a communist.
They really, what were they telling their audience? I mean, what is their plan? Do they expect that everything's going to deteriorate faster, and then there's going to be a massive civil war, and the right wing is going to win, like in the Turner Diaries, that maniacal novel that's been read by virtually every right wing terrorist so far?
Anti-Semitic, crazy.
What? Yeah. And it's like okay, I get it. There's some really terrible stuff posted on X or Twitter. There's some really bad stuff, and maybe some people think that, well, maybe it's going to help with the election, blah 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 blah. Of course, it's going to create massive other problems, and then and then Elon Musk has been giving a lot of money to the Trump campaign. Which is a normal thing to do in the business world.
Actually, it's quite brave for him to do that.
It's very brave, and it's like brave. Because if you have these kind of companies and you have these kind of contracts, it's impossible to not get in trouble with some Democrats or somebody. So there's always a reason that somebody can come up with to come after you. So of course, he could have been a businessman. Musk could have just been a businessman, conquering Mars and whatever, and left it at that. But he decided to do this. So then people are saying, well, there's this anti-Semitic stuff being posted on X, and some people actually like that stuff. But then you see other guys giving money to Trump. You see Sheldon Adelson giving money to Trump. You see this Perlmutter guy from, I think, the Marvel franchise giving money to Trump. So it's like, it doesn't really jive with the left propaganda. It doesn't, or some of the other truther propaganda. The reality isn't really... what they're saying out there, these leftists and the truthers, it's not reality, right? And so the power factor, besides, of course, money, a power factor is now these influencers, and this just happened like 12 hours ago or something. Donald Trump finally on the Joe Rogan podcast, which was never about to happen until the race became so close. And then Joe Rogan changed his mind and said, I'm going to have him on the show. Joe even put on a button shirt. He seemed very sober on the show. And they talked about various topics. And so this actually makes Rogan a lot more powerful now, especially in the future, when after a Trump administration, when there's some other politicians running for office, Rogan will become very powerful. And with Rogan, I see a guy who has clearly has higher than average intelligence. I mean, he's a kind of sharp guy. He seems motivated by altruism, but he's got a severe lack of knowledge about countries and empires and security. So he's still kind of driven by the stuff that he was into 10, 20, 30 years ago. And he just, Rogan gets influenced. I mean, he's supposed to be the influencer, but then he becomes the influencee, right? There's people giving him stuff, and he gives it to his audience. And so it's kind of a weird trend. I mean, you remember the time before the internet. I mean, I still do remember the time before the internet when you had established television shows and networks, and you also had kind of the important anchors and shows and important interviews, and everybody was watching those, and you got similar numbers to what the Rogan interview is pulling.
When I was a child, it was ABC, CBS, and NBC.
Yeah,
and that was what TV had. Those were the major news. And ABC was weaker in terms of its news. It was mainly sports in the 1960s when I was a kid. So you had these three networks, and everybody got their news except for, and of course, people read major newspapers, right? And it's L.A. Times, New York Times, Washington Post, Washington Times came along later, Chicago Tribune, so on. And these papers generally had a left or right, Republican or Democratic stance. But as time went on, the big papers were on the left. They were for the Democrats. You had fewer and fewer voices on the right, and the same thing on TV. It was more slanted by the time you get into the 1970s. All that propaganda from Vietnam and Watergate
Yeah.
kicked in. And of course, now the mainstream media, it's a joke. The mainstream media is so far to the left, always flacking for the Democrats, always flacking for, the way they attacked George W. Bush. He's stupid, he's this, he's that. The way they attacked Trump. Trump is a fascist now. Um, no, it's not. It's not fair and balanced. I think Fox News. It was Glenn Grosclose in his book Left Turn. He said Fox News is fair and balanced. He examined it. He scientifically analyzed the way they covered things, and they were balanced. Actually, I know a lot of people on the right don't like Fox News because they really aren't on the
Yeah.
right. But that's the perception, because everything has gone so far to the left. Fox News is considered right wing.
Yeah, but when you talk about these classic traditional networks, and you're talking about, these established entities, right? You had multiple people planning how they were going to report on things, especially presidential elections, and then there were meetings, internal debates on how to approach this, how to approach that. You had people from various backgrounds and expertise, debating on how to put on a program. But with Joe Rogan, it's literally Rogan himself and his one office guy. I think he's called Jamie, and Jamie seems to be running the equipment. He turns on the lights, the camera, the switcher, the streaming setup, and also Jamie is also researching stuff on the web while they do the show, or maybe a bit before the show, and he's feeding these little bits to Joe Rogan. So it's like Rogan and his one guy. That's essentially the program.
The equipment is everything's been digitalized, so it's much easier to do. And but the thing is, Rogan is a kind of everyman, and people. This is what the polls show, that people don't trust the given authorities, the prevailing authorities. They don't trust the mainstream media. They don't trust the government. They have been lied to. They have been given. There's this general sense that if you go back to ancient Greece, you go back to political science and philosophy as it formed, one of the mainstays of political philosophy is that the function of leaders is to articulate political reality for their people, for the citizens. That's what they do. And in a free society, at least that's what they ideally do. In a dictatorship, they just intimidate and bully and lie. But in a free society, they are articulating political reality for the people, because it's a commonwealth, it's a republic, or whatever, and everybody's kind of responsible as citizens. We're not slaves of some a pharaoh or something. We are participants. So, and of course, I quoted in my last article Epictetus, the Greek philosopher, who said that we are in the world. Human beings exist to spectate and then to interpret reality, and that's what God intends. That we observe His creation, His works, and we interpret, and that's how we exist. And I think there's something profound in that. And in political reality, then the truth will set you free. The truth is what matters. And it is not, with all these government people, the cynicism with which, and I'm watching this election with Kamala Harris, the cynicism with which she lies and evades. In her Brett Baer interview, lying and evading. You said this, then they show her saying it. She has nothing to say about the fact that she's saying the opposite of what she said months ago. She's not even embarrassed. There's no change of
Yeah.
color of her face. She just smoothly goes on, and Donald Trump is the devil, you know. And then they show her lying again, and she says, "Donald Trump is the devil." Basically, I'm reducing it, you know.
Yeah, but
I'm
that's the
characterizing
underlying.
what she did, and
That's
it's
the
like you're
underlying
listening to
technique.
this and you're going, "Wait a minute, maybe she's the devil," you know,
Yeah, and it's like, and you're
because
not just voting. You're not just voting for a candidate. You're voting for essentially a political party, and you're voting for networks who are associated with these political parties. It's like
you're voting for
people
a
are hyper
person that you
focused.
hope is sincere and honest, and that will articulate political
Yeah,
reality and truth
and
to you.
it's
That's
like
what you're
when
hoping for.
you're voting Trump, but you're getting a whole cabinet, and you're getting all the Republican Party, for example. So it's like people are so hyper focused on a single person, and it's like the system is not supposed to be built so that you vote for a king for 4 years. You're not electing a king for 4 years. You're voting on a president, and so it's like, yeah, so calling Trump the devil, calling Trump a fascist who would implement a dictatorship on day one and all that nonsense.
Well, it's a lie. To say that he's a fascist is a lie, because the Mussolini and his party were fascist, and not in America, you know. And it's I mentioned Joseph Schumpeter in his book Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy. He says that the great joke of the left is that a Marxist government in practice is fascist. And he shows that in the book, that that's the truth. I mean, you look at Stalin's regime, you look at Putin's regime,
It's
you
a
look at
cult.
Xi
It's an
Jinping's regime, you look at
absolute
the
cult.
Castro brothers regime in Cuba, you look at Venezuela under Maduro and Hugo Chavez before then. You don't have free elections. You don't have the government treating the people with any kind of justice. You're putting people in jail on false charges to control them. I knew a guy who ran for president against Chavez. Um, and he was in jail. I think it was 4 or 5 years. He jailed him. He got away. He escaped. He's in Europe now, and it was on false charges. They claimed that he was a terrorist and that
Mm.
he had what explosives in his daughter's bedroom. You know, and they arrested him for it. They just planted stuff in his daughter's bedroom. And it's
Yeah.
outrageous. These are fascist regimes, but that's
And
what communism
some
is in
people on
practice. Fascism.
some influencers, not necessarily the biggest ones with the largest audience, but quite a few influencers. I think they're like the archetype frenemy, right? They pretend to be the supporter of Trump and conservatism and Republicans and everything, but they're actually what some of these influencers do. They actually feed into this democratic propaganda about Trump the fascist, because they will insinuate fascism, they will actually voice fascist ideas, or they will sort of go 50% with their statements and indicate that they're actual full fascists. So they're like frenemies. They will feed into this democratic propaganda while pretending to support Trump. And this extends to contesting aspects of an election. Now, of course, when the election will happen, and if it happens to be a very close race, then everybody's going to look at every state and the county. A few thousand votes here, 10,000 votes over there can decide a whole state, which can decide the whole election. So people will contest a lot of things, but if you do this in a professional way, you can get results. You can actually get closer to an accurate number. But there's also ways you can do it wrongly, falsely. You can claim a sensation at a spot where there is no sensation. And so there's so many ways to sabotage contesting aspects of an election, and B, just create more chaos for America in general. So this is what people should look out
This is
for.
what happened with the challenging of the last election in 2020. I mean, all the people I've talked to, there was fraud in the 2020 election. There was testimony of state legislators and people who investigated it, but there was this thing that happened. You had Dennis Montgomery. You had these folks that were promoting this false election fraud narrative, that Dennis Montgomery knew how the election was defrauded. And people promoted that Friends of Trump promoted that. and it turned out to be completely fraudulent. You had your cyber symposium in South Dakota in what was it, August of 2021, and it completely collapsed. They were going to have proof that the election was frauded, some kind of
Hmm.
electronic, from computers, proof, and they had nothing. And it just took the wind out of all the
Yeah.
investigations and all that. It was like these people sank uh, our side by absorbing a false narrative.
Yeah.
And
And
all you
sometimes
have to
it's
do is feed conservatives a false narrative. If they follow it, they destroy themselves with it.
Yeah, because sometimes it's all about self-promoting. You're saying something the audience wants to hear. You post something, and you already know it's going to be successful, so you post more stuff like this to get more clicks and get more money and get more eyeballs on you. So sometimes it's very cynical. Sometimes influencers know what they're saying is not true, or they just really don't really know what
And
they're
see,
talking about.
that's such a betrayal to speak things that you know aren't true. I mean, we all make mistakes. We all misspeak. We all fall into the trap of believing something that's not true in the moment. But the idea is to correct yourself and say, "Oh, I was wrong about this," and try to be as accurate and truthful as you can, because it boils down to this. Politically, a nation has to act. That is, the citizens together have to act. The government has to act. We have to be oriented, which is the most important thing in politics, because in order to save ourselves sometimes, to defend our country, to do what is necessary to keep the country from crashing down, we actions necessary. And action must be based on knowledge, real knowledge and truth. If you act on a distorted notion of what's happening, if you act on a false ideas, you're acting like a crazy person.
Yeah.
Did you catch that thing where that crazy woman comes up to a Greek restaurant and starts tearing apart a Greek flag, and with the mistaken notion it's an Israeli flag, and accusing them of
Oh
genocide?
no.
And the people in the restaurant come out and they finally say, "You do know that's a Greek flag?" It
Oh.
is. She's so ignorant, she doesn't know she's tearing up a Greek flag
because
thinking
it's
it's an
blue
Israeli.
and
I mean,
because
this
it's
is an
blue and
exact.
white.
Yeah, it's got the blue and white like an Israeli flag, right? So she
Oh
she
God.
mistakes this Greek flag for an Israeli flag, and she's like, "Well, I'll have to look it up on the internet." She doesn't even necessarily believe them that
Oh
she's
no.
destroying private property. Look, this is when you have the wrong information, the wrong ideas, when you've been told lies by your leaders, you're like that crazy woman.
Hmm.
Your
Hmm.
actions will be the actions of a stupid, ignorant, crazy person.
Yeah. And what's a clinical schizophrenic? It's a
Yeah.
person for medical reasons. It's a person who believes things that are completely false. They're not based in reality, but they take this stuff extremely seriously, especially when it concerns a perceived threat. So it's like you
Well, they,
get
they look at
into
a toaster and they see an elephant, a charging elephant, right? A
yeah, they did,
schizophrenic.
or they say that the toaster is a conduit for the intergalactical, interdimensional agents that come after them, and they're putting gas into the room to kill them or whatever. So it's
Yeah, so
like
they're take a sledgehammer to the toaster to save themselves.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's like it's there's gonna be we have to have a much higher level of accuracy. Think like analysts when it comes to contesting elements of an election. We can't just go on this crazy trip that's gonna get us nowhere, because the Democrats they expect this. The Democrats expect terrible influencers on the right doing the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing. So then the Democrats will actually capitalize on that, and they will dissect, oh look, these right-wing influencers, they've done this and that and threatened decent people and came up with this craziness. Look how crazy they are, look how dangerous they are. And this is kind of how the game is played. And now there's this here's a current example. This is AP News, right? This is the Associated Press. And they did a piece on Ben Swan, right? And this Ben Swan guy actually tried to come after the AP because Ben Swan was working with or got attached himself to a lawsuit, I think, from Kennedy Jr. against.
He sued the Associated Press.
I think it's in the story here. I got the quote here. It says Swan joined Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s anti-vaccine organization in a lawsuit pending against several news organizations, including the AP, accusing them of violating antitrust laws. So this is kind of trying to take shots at the AP. So now the Associated Press is coming after Ben Swan, and it's not looking pretty. So Ben Swan calls himself an independent journalist, even though one of his corporations takes Russian money for foreign to make
that's really
programs.
Independent of him.
Yeah, so that's one of his companies making programs for foreign audiences. So that's where he gets Russian money. He actually had this. He announced this publicly, or he put in the paperwork for his work with the Russians. So he thinks that's why it's safe for him to do so. But then he has another company, and this other company, they're making stuff for an American audience. And this company doesn't take Russian money, he claims, but there's an overlap of content and guests between these two companies that he runs. And it's like they put out a video series on Zelensky called Zelensky Unmasked, and this was released right when the U.S. The U.S. government was debating on providing more aid to Ukraine. So what interesting timing, right? And so,
sure, the Russian money had nothing to do with him doing a hit piece on Zelensky. Oh no,
sure. So it says here. It says here that this video series, Zelensky Unmasked, produced by Ben Swan, it says that this stuff was amplified by various people on social media. So people with a huge following. So one person has 1 million followers, the other one has 2 million followers, and they all amplify this video series called Zelensky Unmasked, and it becomes a very serious issue right when the government or Congress. This was in April as Congress was debating increasing military assistance to Ukraine. So it's like talk about foreign influence, right? And it says an investigation by the Associated Press also provides insights into the shadowy and profitable world of political influencers who are not required to disclose who is paying them, raising transparency concerns. So Swan filed paperwork with the Justice Department 2 years ago to register one of his companies as working for Russian state media. In an interview, Swan said he has kept his work for Russian interests separate from what he produces for U.S. audiences. So Zelensky Unmasked was for U.S. audiences, and he says this was not paid by the Russians. The AP, however, found that there was some overlap in how the two entities or corporations operated. So same kind of guests, same people involved. And Swan promoted some stuff in the past, like the Pizzagate stuff and anything, Sandy Hook stuff, anything that was popular.
Did he promote Pizzagate?
Yeah, that's what they're saying here.
That's interesting, and he's got some kind of Russian connection where they give him money. That's really intriguing.
So he's done Pizzagate, he did Sandy Hook stuff, and some other stuff.
Oh, really? He supported that along with Alex Jones? Was he?
I haven't seen everything that Ben Swan had done about Sandy Hook, and I don't recall.
What is his relationship with Alex Jones? Do you know?
No, because I'm not as knowledgeable about Ben Swan's work. I mean, I heard about Zelensky Unmasked, but I didn't get to see it because I was busy with other topics. But there's some overlap. Everybody can try to cover the same topics and kind of be that kind of guy. And so Swan said he worked as a correspondent for RT America, Russia, formerly known as Russia Today America. Was part of a Russian state media outlet. Then it was banned from the American airwaves, and RT officials then asked if he wanted to produce shows for the network to air outside the U.S. Now, of course, you can see that stuff on the internet when you're an American citizen. It's produced for the international market, but you can still see it on the web, of course. And it says Swan said he produced 10 shows a week. Is that a mistake here? It says 10 shows a week using RT America's old studios in Washington. And it says under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, individuals must register with the Justice Department when they seek to influence U.S. policy and public opinion on behalf of foreign governments. Not doing so can result in serious criminal charges. And we saw this recently with a Black Power organization in America who got into serious trouble for doing that kind of stuff, not really registering and having Russian connections. Swan's company, Rebel Media Productions. Oh, he's such a rebel. First registered with the Justice Department in August 2022, a few months into the war in Ukraine, saying it worked for RT's parent company and related entities. The disclosures show Rebel Media Productions was paid more than $6 million in less than 2 years by RT-related entities. And then he says this other company that he has that produces material for the American market, that company is financed by private individuals, and he's not saying who they are. So it's like Rogan has a big audience, right? I mean, if Rogan has, Trump on, it does 11, 12 million views in just a few hours, the first few hours. But this guy, he can use all these resources and has all this, all this stuff going on. He makes a video series called Zelensky Unmasked, and then that gets amplified by all kinds of people on social media. So it gets at least tens of millions of people have heard about it. They don't necessarily click on it. Your mic is off.
Is Swan a Mormon?
I don't know. It doesn't say here in the
I think he
story.
went to Brigham Young University, didn't he?
I don't know.
Yeah. It's yeah, but the thing is, this is very typical of Americans not being sufficiently informed about the situation with Russia and China and the ongoing Cold War that never ended, and the communist threat. So they get off on these other tracks, and they're easily misled into these conspiracy theories or other ideas of how the world works. Because the most important thing, as I said before, is to articulate political reality. And if you leave out the communist movement and Russia and China and the KGB or SVR and GRU, you leave out the Chinese, how the Chinese are infiltrating Mexico and Canada and the US, and that they're arming themselves. And we're not. America's not building up its nuclear arsenal. Russia and China are building up theirs. When you leave that out, you're leaving out the big pieces on the board. You're not explaining real grand strategic reality, the position, geopolitics. You're not describing it correctly. And then you go off on all these tangents and you drag this large audience of millions of people with you. What you have done, you have misled people by articulating basically a false narrative. Maybe some of the facts are right, but the problem is all facts only make sense if they're correctly interpreted.
Yeah.
It's not, the facts don't have any meaning standing on their own. Facts have to be interpreted. And there's the problem is the spectators are misinterpreting the facts, or they're given misinterpretations. And this is what active measures are all about, to present facts that are actually misleading, to provide a false context for facts. And so that what people do today is people have lost the ability to interpret because they no longer, they no longer know where to put the facts, how to put things together, how to connect. They think they're dot connecting, and they're not. Yeah. They're misconnecting the dots.
Or they think they're pragmatic because they say, well, if my side, if my group, if they tell lies somehow, sometimes, I accept that because I think my group is the best one, the right one, so I have to just go along with it if this lie helps us and all that noise. But it causes so many problems. And here's an example. Here's a current example. This was yesterday. This was October 25th. The Wall Street Journal reported that Elon Musk has been in contact with Putin. And they talk about regular contact with Putin. They're not really being precise. It says only this. It says former and current European, US, and Russian officials told the Wall Street Journal that Musk has held further conversations with Putin and other high-ranking Kremlin officials since late 2022. This reportedly included Sergei Kiriyenko, Putin's first deputy chief of staff. And on and on and on. So, and then they go into Starlink, internet, and how it was used in the war. According to the Wall Street Journal, the contacts are a well-kept secret in the U.S. government due to Musk's access to sensitive information as a major security and technology contractor. So, yeah, the satellites and rockets and whatnot. Blah, blah, blah. The matter is all the more sensitive as Musk has become an increasingly vocal supporter of Trump, even joining him at a rally in Pennsylvania in early October. So there's like little tidbits, and they're creating this master narrative with just a few paragraphs. It's like there are so many reasons for somebody, so many possible different reasons for somebody like Musk to have a few conversations with high-powered Russians. So there's so that Musk may believe he could have Musk may believe he has a possible effect on the Russians, maybe a slight effect, maybe calm things down. Maybe that's the expectation of Musk.
There's because of Musk's involvement in space and launching satellites, you've got all kinds of reasons to talk to other people who have satellites, who have things in space. Because guess what? You don't want to accidentally disrupt somebody else's satellites,
Yeah.
right?
So it's like there's and also then there's this idea that's been going around, especially since the Bush administration, in the 2000s, and that was a popular idea back then. Misguided, yes, but unfortunately, it was a widespread idea back then. And it said that we should be nice to the Russians to keep the Russians separate from the Chinese. Now, of course, if you really know that stuff, that was a naive idea back then, but it's still kind of lingering even at this point, because now everybody's seeing how the North Koreans are getting involved. The Chinese are supplying the Russians more and more with stuff, and so people are getting more afraid. So this may have been one of the motivating factors for Elon Musk to have a few conversations, probably just maybe a few minutes each, or maybe an hour with a guy or half an hour with a guy. Have a few conversations. Maybe even try to feel them out, just to try to get a feeling of what the Russians are thinking or expressing, or what impression you get. I mean, it's also, when you talk to these Russians, you also get an impression. You kind of get a sense of, how are these guys, right? So there's many explanations why you would have these conversations, but the Wall Street Journal and other media outlets, they're just dead set on a single narrative. Trump is the devil, and Trump is in bed with the Russians, and Elon is in bed with Trump. End of story. So it's like this one cookie cutter silly narrative, and it's all based on a few sources that say, yeah, Musk talked to a bunch of people, some people.
Yeah, I think, I had a chance when I was in Allentown. I gave a speech there last weekend. I met a friend of Elon Musk, Greg Autry, who's written a book called Red Moon Rising, which is a very interesting book. And I learned a lot about Musk talking to him, things you would never know, that made me much more appreciative of Elon Musk and what he's doing and the tremendous work that SpaceX has done. I mean, I never realized SpaceX, the Chinese can launch a satellite for what, 30 million per kilogram, of stuff into space, 1,000 kilos. Musk can do it for 1 million, 1/30th the cost, and the Chinese are the next cheapest. And the Russians are just being run out of space. They can't compete. They've lost a lot of their rocket scientists.
They're terrible, the Russians right now.
They're you had these moon missions. Everybody knows, and this is one of the things I've been interested in, and he kind of informed me. There's this stuff called helium-3 on the moon. Helium-3 is produced in the sun. The sun outgasses it, but the Earth's atmosphere destroys it, so none of it reaches the surface of the Earth. But the moon is covered in this stuff. Certain places on the moon that it falls. And this stuff is a natural fusion fuel. And of course, they just had a breakthrough in fusion here recently. Fusion power is coming. It's just a matter of years away now. Fusion is so inexpensive. And this fuel, you think, well, from the moon, they could never use it. No, just a shuttle bay. This is what Greg Autry told me. Just a shuttle bay of helium-3 from the moon could run China for 3 years. I mean, I think the statistic, he'll correct me probably if I'm wrong, but you could get all the electricity for one household for 10 cents.
I got
That's how cheap this fusion fuel is.
Yeah, here's what this is just one of many examples of this. This is from the website of the European Space Agency. It says here helium-3 mining on the lunar surface. The idea of harvesting a clean and efficient form of energy from the moon has stimulated science fiction and fact in recent decades. Unlike Earth, which is protected by its magnetic field, the moon has been bombarded with large quantities of helium-3 by the solar wind. It is thought that this isotope could provide safer nuclear energy in a fusion reactor since it is not radioactive and would not produce dangerous waste products. Here we go.
It's just amazing stuff. And, he said the moon is worth trillions. And he's written a book, Red Moon Rising, about the Chinese want to claim the moon because the moon is going to be as all these technologies are coming online, there's a technological revolution. We are accelerating our ability to build things. And there's new building materials that require a lot of energy to make. And there's robotics coming. All of these things are coming, and the Chinese realize this is the industrial and military future. Whoever controls the moon is going to dominate economically and technologically the Earth.
Yeah.
And SpaceX, and look at it, it's an entrepreneur. It's a capitalist guy who has outdone all the governments on Earth, all the money they put in, all the investments. He's done better with private enterprise. Isn't that something?
Yeah, no, of course. If Musk has made some statements on his own platform, Twitter or X as it's now called, some statements that I thought were misguided, regarding Ukraine. There could also be another reason behind these statements. Musk probably knew that he wasn't going to influence Congress, really. He wasn't going to change the way that Ukraine war is going to go. But Musk made these statements, and then that probably was some kind of a door opener. So Musk could actually start talking to a few of these Russian guys. And this reminds me of this policy of being tough on foreign policy, but kind of presenting an open door diplomatically and have some side channels diplomatically, because that puts a lot of pressure on these dictators like Putin, because these other guys in Russia are thinking, maybe if we can get rid of Putin, and we end the war in Ukraine, maybe we can get back on a diplomatic track. Maybe we can really change things. So it's a powerful tool, but it's a delicate tool, and many people don't understand that game, or some people, they don't want to explain that game to the audience because it's more convenient to say Trump in bed with the Russians and Musk is now in bed with Trump and they're all bad, and it's like I mean, this is the Wall Street Journal. They're not morons. They know how to. I mean, if they have intelligent sources, they should be able to have a general understanding of intelligence thinking. There's always multiple scenarios. You can't just predetermine one set of.
If you having talked to Greg Autry, I got a completely different perspective on the sophistication of Musk's organization and how he has to deal with these international players, and how he has avoided being compromised as one of the few businessmen, having factories in China, but not being partnered with the Chinese, not exposing, technology that would be dual use military technology to China, being very responsible. That impresses me. Okay, you're going to get some cheaper parts for things that you make, but you're not really giving and the Chinese are just drooling. They want his technology. They want his secrets, and he knows it. He's not going to let them get it. And the fact that America, entrepreneurship and capitalism in the free market is what's going to get us these advances that can solve serious problems, energy problems, pollution problems in our country. And of course, that will ultimately help to feed and clothe people more effectively, and might just be, if we develop these platforms, one of the biggest threats to planet Earth is this torrid stream, this asteroid field that this time of year in late October, we go through, the Earth passes through that. And there's always a danger of some large meteor, some large chunk of this comet that broke up thousands of years ago in space, of hitting the Earth and making an end to civilization, or maybe an end to all life on Earth. The fact that we could track those things and prevent a catastrophe, the fact that we're learning things about the sun, there could be a catastrophe coming out of a sun. I mean, we have a lot of problems to sort out, because if the sun has a hiccup, we could lose power on Earth and we could have billions of people die. So we have serious problems that we need to solve.
Yeah, and obviously
science is going to be the way to solve them.
And obviously the Russians are trying to get into contact with Western business people. The Russians are trying to figure out how to approach them, what to tell them what they want to hear. I mean, that anybody who knows these things should expect that to happen. But that doesn't mean that any business guy in the West is immediately going to fall for this kind of stuff. Now, of course, there's some more sophisticated layers to this, and I mentioned this on the show. The whole thing with this fake conservative underground. Conservative underground in the Soviet Union, this kind of the game that the KGB had played, especially during the 80s, and then later on, where they pretended that there was a conservative underground in the Soviet Union, that communism was never able to kill Christianity in Russia. Communism was never able to kill conservatism in Russia, and so then this underground formed, and this conservative underground actually brought down communism. That's the true reason why communism supposedly fell. And Sobchak was a member of the underground, and Putin was a member of the underground. So this was kind of this elite fairy tale for an elite Western audience that was created. And so now we're expected to, or powerful people in the West are expected to deal with these supposed underground or former underground heroes of Russia to save the world.
These narratives are very dangerous for our elites or other people to believe in, because the Russians and Chinese are classic practitioners of this kind of strategic deception.
Yeah. And I read,
they do.
I read this was a couple of years ago when it came out, I read the book by Catherine Belton, Putin's People, and there was a small anecdote in it. And I thought, what is that? It says like, one of my sources from the banking world told me the story
Putin's
about.
People is one of those books that tries to make Trump look like one of Putin's people, right?
Yeah, but it's like there was this anecdote where I thought this is unusual. She's the author said that, well, my source in the banking world talked about this family member, a German princess who was originally from the old Russia. Who had to flee from communism, and so this princess lives in Hessen in Germany, or lived. She's not dead.
We talked about that.
Yeah,
yes.
and she lives in this castle, and she married into the von Metternich clan and everything. And one of these days, a young Vladimir Putin from the KGB, a young Vladimir Putin shows up at her castle, and he takes a religious confession, and he says how much of a Christian he is and everything.
Oh boy.
And like, what? I'm like, what is that? So I grab literally all the books that this princess had written, and she extremely strongly insinuates in these books that there was this underground, this conservative.
Just think how that was used to recruit her to be an unwitting conduit of disinformation from this group of KGB officers pretending to be Christians.
That's a very high probability, and especially when she had all the contacts. I mean, she could pick up a phone and talk to British royalty. She could pick up a phone and talk to German right-wing billionaires. She could talk to the most powerful politicians in Germany and all over Europe. So she had the contacts, and she gets a visit from a young Vladimir Putin telling her that story about this underground over there, and then
Which means Putin was part of the deception that Anatoly Golitsyn wrote about from the very earliest days.
Yeah, and it's like I can't believe my eyes. I'm reading the books of the princess, and she says, it's like this. Communism never killed Christianity. There was this underground and never killed the true Russia. It was believed to be dead, but now it's resurrected like Christ. The true Russia is resurrected.
This is just right out of
Holy moly!
Trust. This is a repeat of Operation Trust that Felix Dzerzhinsky and others in the early Soviet regime. Put
so
on
I
the West.
think that somebody like Elon Musk is targeted in that way. I think that General Flynn was targeted in that way. So these are not all these powerful people that have been approached in one way or the other. They're not all evil. They're not all stupid. But when the deception is that big and it's been going on for so long, it seems kind of convincing, right? So this is why we have to have these educated conversations and say, okay, it looks to be a certain type of operation. So and I hope that Elon is making the right moves, and he's kind of getting a feeling for these Russians, and maybe getting some contacts that may be useful later, in a good way, maybe useful later. This is kind of how the game is played. So we'll just wait and see how that goes. It's way too early to start a public condemnation in the Wall Street Journal of Elon Musk. That's just so unprofessional and absolutely wrong. But this is what we've gotten used to in the media, and even some former intelligence professional are doing the same thing. Like, have we talked about this on the show? Like Christopher Steele, the guy who put together the Trump dossier with the hotel room in Moscow or St. Petersburg, and then it got leaked to the public. And then so Christopher Steele says, well, now I'm a public figure, so I have to explain. I did this dossier because for a paying customer, I work in private intelligence, and I just collected what was expected of me to collect, all the dirt that I could find on Trump or suspected dirt.
Did he explain that he was basically kicked out of MI6 because he had unauthorized contacts with Russian agents?
No. He talks about his professional ethics, and but I'm kind of missing these ethics when he's now indirectly saying don't vote Trump, don't vote Republican. I'm wondering if that's his idea of professional ethics when Trump is very complicated, and in some people around Trump that have been moving around internationally, it's very complicated from an intelligence point of view. It's very complex. But it's like you can't just put just force it into this cookie cutter narrative and say, well, that's everything you could say about it. It's like Trump and the Russians. Like it's so much different. But he's not.
Especially when this narrative about Trump rings untrue. There's no corroboration of it. It turns out to be a fabrication when you looked at it. Even the mainstream media here that don't like Trump would not publish it.
Yeah,
right?
And it's like I mean, because a guy like Christopher Steele should know. You cannot just send intelligence officers en masse to Russia disguised as one thing or the other. It's not as simple as that, because it's a closed society. It's a dictatorship. You have to lure some Russians out of Russia. You have to get them, closer to the West and just talk to them, get a feel for them. This is kind of like, and if you give that context, it would be so helpful for the audience out there. But then maybe Christopher Steele is not popular anymore, and he can't sell his new book, and he doesn't get booked anymore for his private intelligence, services. It's like, what are his moral hazards? What are his conflicting interests there? I mean, it's like, I mean, if he
And,
wants to
it,
talk
and
about
it's, what's
professional
really odd is
ethics,
this that's the Skripals, and Skripal was a GRU guy that was jailed for spying for the British. They
yeah,
got traded, swapped out, and of course he was poisoned with a Novichok, and he and his daughter were poisoned by it. But did you know he worked for the agency, Steele's agency, and had a connections
oh,
with Steele?
ay, ay,
So
ay,
it's
ay,
like,
ay,
isn't it
ay,
funny?
ay,
This thing
ay,
all
ay, ay,
breaks, and suddenly that guy gets poisoned. What was there a connection there? I wonder to the Skripal poisoning and to Steele's involvement in the in these this narrative about Trump and Russia. There is this wilderness of mirrors here. There's people I get attacked on X, being attacked by X by these people who are saying that, why are you soft on Trump, and you're not very smart about Trump and stuff. It's like, no, I'm looking, I've got my eyes wide open, and I'm just not believing everything you're believing in, because
yeah,
I know the disinformation, the trickiness of the information.
yeah,
You cannot literally take things at face value when the source is from Russia.
yeah.
You
And I
just
mean,
can't.
over the years I covered the Manafort stuff. I read all the books, literally almost all the relevant books on the Trump and the Russians topics, and still I said to my audience, it's way more complicated than these books say it is. There's a whole nother context to it, and it's like it's
And
not
there's the
all about Trump
psychology
anyway.
of Trump.
And
There's the
it's not,
psychology of
yeah,
Trump.
and it's not all about Trump anyway. So it's just get real. And I think that people I mean, everybody now, whether it's Trump, whether it's Elon Elon Musk, whether it's Joe Rogan, a lot of people are concerned about World War III, and they're concerned about the nuclear weapons, and the Russians, and the North Koreans, and the Chinese. So a lot of people, they try to do things to calm things down. They try to do their part, try to do their bit. And it's like there's so many events happening right now concerning warfare, or global warfare, and everything is connected now. So now we got Israel with a long delay. Israel finally hitting back against Iran, hitting military targets, insinuating we can hit some other stuff too, some more sensitive stuff. We saw that Israel was showing its teeth, that they could, of course, with Western help, they could handle the Hamas guys. They could handle Iranian threats. They could handle all these opponents that have been built up. And we talked about this on the show. The PLO, the Hamas, the Palestinian groups, they were all KGB built and run. The Iranians, the whole Iranian revolution, the Islamic revolution in Iran. This was the work of Russia too. And so you can't separate these things anymore. And even though countries are hesitating with using nuclear weapons or biological or chemical weapons to a large degree, they're hesitating about that. But then what are you left with? It's manpower and it's war production. And things are different these days. Now, Russia has a manpower shortage and they have production problems. But China has all the people, and China has a lot of production, and North Korea.
By the way, Russia's production problems aren't anything near as the production problems in Europe or the
yeah.
U.S. or Canada.
Oh yeah.
People don't realize that everything has to be judged relative to everything else. A note on Israel's strike. On Wednesday, I received a call from a connected person who said that Israel will attack Iran on Friday. Of course, in Eastern time here in the U.S., it was on Friday. It was yesterday. We learned it around, I don't know, between 6 and 7 p.m. Yesterday. And he said that the reason for the timing, it was on the Jewish calendar. It's the end of the Feast of the Tabernacle. That is on the Jewish calendar, relates to the anniversary of the October 7th attack. That is, our regular calendar, October 7th is, of course, past us. But on their calendar, this marks really the same thing as October 7th. So they're responding for October 7th, and of course all the strikes that have happened since then on Israel. And it's interesting that the part of it was that they would offer this off ramp to Iran, attacking military targets, saying we're not going to attack your oil fields if you take this off ramp, and we just call it quits right here. And of course, the experts think Iran is not going to take the off ramp. Iran is going to is likely to widen the conflict, do something in the Straits of Hormuz, or counterstrike some sensitive target for the West. We'll see in the next few days. And what really alarms me in this is the North Korean mobilization that was announced. If it's true or not, they announced it around the middle of the month. And of course, the Chinese minor mobilization and the Chinese fleet coming out and being around Taiwan, even though that exercise ended, their fleet is still out. And the Russians have fleet units linked up with Chinese fleet units. So this makes me wonder, are they contemplating using Israel's strike on Iran to widen the war, start something in the Far East, encourage Iran to close the Strait of Hormuz, or do something more aggressive? Because Mr. Wang had told me, I think I mentioned it on our show, that China really wants to sink an aircraft carrier. And of course, the Russians have deployed bombers before to Iran that have anti-ship missiles that are carrier sinking missiles. So the Russians could try to use Iran as a base to attack an American carrier in the Middle East area. The Chinese could do it in the Far East. And of course, you got North Korea, which could reignite the Korean War. And this was something, Lee Meng-yan, yesterday you were with our anti-communist conference. I had known this for some weeks because Mr. Wang had told me, but Lee Meng-yan kind of surprised me by then publicly stating what I had been told in private, which was the Chinese are infiltrating troops into North Korea. And they have been doing that for some period of weeks now. And for the Chinese to put major military units into North Korea means that's a very bad sign. It doesn't prove that the Korean War is going to be ignited, but it's very suggestive that they are contemplating restarting the Korean War, because North Korea and South Korea are at war. It's a ceasefire in that war, and they could start it at any time.
Yeah, they've just ratified a defense treaty. This was now in the news. It was not. I think it was headline news for some reason. I mean, it was announced.
Putin had gone to North Korea recently.
Yeah, it was announced. I mean, this was in the press when they had the big meeting and they were talking about it. But now it's ratified, and it says here, the State Duma, the lower house of the Russian parliament, swiftly endorsed the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty. And so the treaty obliges both countries to provide immediate military assistance using all means if either is attacked, marking the most significant alliance between the two nations since the end of the Cold War. It's even more than that. It's more important than that. I mean, listen to this. Immediate total response. It's not like we have a military partnership. If you get attacked, we will decide how we will help you, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less. No, it's right away and it's total. So that goes both ways. If Russia says, and they always claim to be the victim, right? It's just how they play. If Russia says, again, we're the victim, we've been attacked, so now the Koreans are going to help us, because we're the good guys.
They could launch a missile.
Right, and then if the other way around, if Korea says, North Korea says, we've been attacked, somebody attacked us, even though it's a fake attack or they bombed themselves or something.
Well, Kim Jong-un interpreted a drone that came over the border as an attack, and it said one more drone and we're at war.
Exactly, and so if the Koreans play the victim, then the Russians will say, well, we got to save you now, we got to save Korea now, so we'll get involved in Asia. I mean, that's how crazy and important this is. And I mean, if we remember, in the Soviet era, there was always a massive standing army, under Russia's control. And while everybody else was demobilizing after World War II, the Soviets were not really demobilizing that much. And so they had the standing army. They always had millions of soldiers in reserve. I mean, really active reserve.
Up to 30 million, by the way. During
Yeah.
the Cold War, the Soviet Union could mobilize 30 million
So
men.
it was a huge amount of manpower. And at the time, back then, China was not yet an industrial player like it is today. So even now, Russia is short on manpower. Russia has production problems. But China can solve all these problems for the Russians. And they belong together anyway. And they've belonged together for a very long time. And it's like, isn't it funny that, the rise of North Korea really happened in the 90s when communism was officially over, when everybody was looking the other way and nobody wanted any hassle in Asia. So this is when the Kim Jong-il era was happening and, having these reactors and starting work on a bigger nuclear program and just defying international law and everything. And so then it became a bigger problem starting in the 90s for real. And now it's North Korea is a nation built for war, built for nuclear war, and built for other types of warfare. They have a significant amount of manpower. And so the the actual communist bloc of countries, they have something that we in the West do not have. This incredible amount of manpower that's available on short notice. They can intimidate everybody, and they have brainwashed everybody from childhood onwards. And we can't compete with that, especially we Europeans. We've forgotten about warfare. We don't even know what warfare is anymore. And so we're intimidated easily. While these other nations, they can mobilize millions of soldiers and send them to our doorstep, and they hate us even though they know nothing about us. That's kind of, if you're not using nuclear weapons as of now, if you're not using biological and chemical weapons as of now on a large scale, you can use manpower to a tremendous advantage. And because recently Zelensky said, well, we either get NATO membership or we need nuclear weapons. And Ukraine could actually improvise nuclear weapons, at least some, so that would maybe keep the Russians or maybe motivate the Russians to not use nuclear weapons for a while. But then there's still the manpower problem. So you're not using NBC weapons, but there's going to be more and more people shooting at each other. And, with these Chinese, they just have more people.
Well, the Chinese do have the largest military in the world and the largest industrial base in the world. So if you're going for raw production of artillery and artillery shells and a lot of weapons, and a lot of war is about attrition. If you can have those numbers, do those numbers, overwhelm the quality, the small defensive forces of the Pacific, the free Pacific nations, South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, Australia, and so on? Do they overwhelm them? Thailand, and of course, I see a shift in India, which is interesting. I think India, being part of BRICS, they're seeing what's going on, how the dollar is being attacked. And Modi said, "Why should we attack the West?" At this BRICS meeting, we don't
Yeah.
want to become an anti-Western. Because Modi's looking at this and he's looking at the Chinese, and the Indians are smart about the Chinese. They know the Chinese don't mean anybody well. And they're at odds with the Chinese. China's sitting on Indian territory. They invaded
Yeah.
India in 1962, and they kept the territory.
And India is especially not happy about China's biological
No.
warfare program. They even
China's
put out
taking
studies in
over-
public about that.
China's in Sri Lanka, which is a real threat to India. And I don't understand that the Indians have tolerated it as much as they have. But of course, a general war between India and China would be a very serious affair because both of them are nuclear powers. And India is not, I don't think their nuclear deterrent is as effective as the Chinese. So India would be but India is a country that is in some ways surpassing China. And but it has, the most populous country now in the world, more people than China, has social problems. has cultural problems. And we don't know, is India a great power? Can it function that way? Can it hold its own? But it's interesting that Modi, the leader of India, made this statement. And of course, I don't know if you noticed, but um, Belarus and Turkey were invited to the BRICS meeting, but they weren't included in aspects
Hmm.
of it, and they were sidelined. And you know that Lukashenko has gotten positively lost his temper over it.
Hmm.
He is not happy with the way he was treated.
Do you remember how big approximately India's nuclear arsenal is? Because I don't
I
remember that.
don't think anybody knows. I only think they have a few dozen weapons, is my guess. Probably are around the amount that North Korea has, and probably not as sophisticated as because I think North Korea's program is built for them by the Russians.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Is what
just
I
like,
got. I'd run into years ago an official of the International Atomic Energy Agency that kind of on the sly. I had a conversation with him, and he said, "Look, it's the North Koreans didn't make their program themselves." And I'd said the
sure,
Chinese then, and I said the
sure,
Russians, and then he wouldn't answer me. He said it wasn't the Chinese, but that meant it had to be the Russians. The Russians
yeah,
proliferated to North Korea, and I
yeah.
think that
It's
Russia's
like they're
nuclear tests for the last 2 decades have been in North Korea.
and it's like this plausible deniability is built into this whole thing. So
Oh yeah,
if if
oh yeah.
if North Korea attacks someone, then the Russians can play dumb, the Chinese can play dumb, and they say we didn't do
Yes. Oh,
that.
we didn't do it. Yeah,
We didn't
we didn't
order
do
them
it.
to do it. They just, we're completely innocent here. But it's like you built this thing, you built this North Korea from the ground up, and it's like your thing, it's your tool. It's like it's the gun in your hand. The whole country has been built for warfare.
Well, 5, 6 years ago, the Russians sent more military advisors to North Korea. They doubled the track lines running from Russia into North Korea. And of course, there's Korean troops now going to fight the Ukrainians in Russia. There's already troops in the Kursk area building bunkers and fortifications against the Ukrainian counter invasion of Russia. So, North Korea is an integral member of the communist bloc, just like Iran is, just like Cuba and Venezuela are, and if Lula da Silva has his way, Brazil will be, and I think Mexico is de facto. There is a communist bloc, a communist movement associated with it, and it's got its fifth column here in the United States and in your country, Germany, in the European Union, and they're everywhere. You look at the new government in London.
Oh
You
yeah,
know, Keir Starmer. He's a British friends of mine. They say he's got to be a communist, right? Labor Party. They took over the Democratic Party. They took over the Labor Party. They're in your Social Democratic Party in Germany. Goodness knows they're all over France. Our friend Jean Robin says that France is basically a colony of China. Now, is there any sign that Europe is moving away from China? Maybe. Maybe
yeah. I
they're
mean,
going
there
to
was
shift
a
to India.
there
There's
was
talk about that shifting to India. We heard this talk yesterday.
yeah there was
Well, what do you
a
think of that? That India could be the decisive point, that we could
true.
shift, that
I mean,
India
I
could
was
be the way out of this?
I was a bit surprised. Like maybe a year ago, there was a major trade delegation that came from Germany to China. And so these were like the biggest players you could ever think of, not just German corporations, but German-based international corporations. So these are the movers and shakers. They're the ones that sell the cars and buy the resources and all that. And so they sent this elite group of industry representatives to China, which happens every once in a while. And so they talked to the Chinese. And so what the press could actually understand about what about those meetings was that there was a shift away from China, and what surprised me was that it's easier to move away from China than previously thought in public. So apparently there was always a safety mechanism built in. So even the impact on the German economy, the impact on the German economy wouldn't even be that bad if we find new trade partners to replace the Chinese with. And
Yeah, and you
this is
see,
kind of,
Japan is already doing this too. Japan is expanding its trade relations with India.
yeah. So it's like there's so much communist infiltration, but there's also other things happening. There's also other dynamics at play here. So there's a secret battle going on everywhere, especially here, and you see some of these built-in safety mechanisms kick in at some point, and you see almost every week now somebody gets busted for Russian contacts, or more Chinese technology is getting banned and blocked. I mean, they're talking about blocking Chinese cars from these Chinese cars from the European market, because of course they can subsidize everything. They can ruin every international industry, the Chinese, if they choose to do so, like the car industry. And they say, well, they got their hands on all kinds of industry designs. Funny how that happens. And magically they can replicate things like gearboxes. I mean, they were major. This was all over the press over the last 10 years. Oh, another data breach at Volkswagen, another data breach at, some supplier or whatever who makes the gearboxes. And all this data is being stolen, and magically a few years later, the Chinese, they make these cars, these electric cars, and they're really cheap and they're well made and the gearboxes are good. And, just suddenly they come up with these products, and they probably make a loss with these products, and they want to sell them en masse to Europe. And there's a bunch of people here that are pissed off about the high taxes and the high energy costs, and you're supposed to be because of the Green Party and the Social Democrats, you could be forced to replace the entire heating system in your house. And we're talking Germany, which is pretty cold most of the year. So we have these sophisticated heating systems in our homes. They're either gas powered or they're oil powered. Now, for example, we have this gigantic oil tank in our basement here, and it's a separate room. That's actually the rule. It has to be its own separate room with a fire secure door, which is more like a hatch. And this is what is it, 5,000 liters or more? This is a serious piece of gear, and this is kind of common here. So these systems are expensive, and so you have these lines running around your basement, feeding the oil into the burner, and then the water gets pumped all over the house. So these systems cost a lot of money because it's so cold here, and we depend on these systems. And so now you're being forced to replace the whole system with an eco heating system. And you're supposed to insulate the walls. I mean, if you look at a German wall, the average German house wall is like this, and it's cinder blocks or concrete, and some of the walls are like this thick. And they want to force you to add another layer that's this thick of insulating material on the outside, and then of course you need to have another surface put on top of that. You have to move the windows further outside because otherwise it looks like you're in a submarine. And people are so fed up, they want to save money any way they can, so they buy these Chinese products, either illegally, trying to get them through the mail because everything is so cheap that comes from China, right? Or they consider buying a Chinese car because they say, yeah, I don't like the Chinese, but it's cheaper, so I buy a Chinese car. And so now there could be massive tariffs coming against these Chinese cars. But wait, when Trump does it, or when the Republicans announce, when the Republicans do it, and the Republicans announce blocking off Chinese products, then this is called devilry. But then our European Union is doing the same thing.
They just hate Chinese people.
Yeah, but then our leftist, crazy European Union master government, the European Union is doing the same thing, right?
Well, see, it's good that people realize their self-interest, whether they're Germans or Americans. You got to stand up for yourself. Nobody's going to stand up for you people if you don't stand up for yourselves.
Yeah.
They're not going to do it.
So it's not like, I mean, we talk about espionage on this show and deep rooted, very long term operations, and these are really scary operations. These are really scary prospects, but there's also other dynamics going on. It's not everything is completely bleak. Not everything is hopeless, but it's a
the
matter
enemy's
of
not 10 foot tall.
it's a matter of getting our act together and also communicating better, creating better relationships with people. I mentioned this in the show yesterday with these other guests, and I thought, man, that's a really cool person you brought into the show, because Trevor unfortunately couldn't make it. Yeah. And you just introduced me to another person that's really interesting, and he seems like a person
Michael's
you could also
very well informed. He's a person who's been working in government circles. He's got clearances. He's briefed congressmen. Yeah, Michael Del Rosso yesterday on the anti-communist podcast. I think some people were maybe in shock at the things he said. They're things I've known about for years. And the thing is that there are people in the United States that understand the communists have formed a counterstate in the United States, and they're trying to take over the country. And of course, this has been going on in Germany and Italy and France and Great Britain. It's been going on throughout the West. It's been an ongoing project ever since the fall of the Soviet Union. When really the floodgates opened and people were, sort of accepting Russians, and communism was no longer, there was no vigilance anymore. But this was the big opportunity for Moscow and Beijing. Beijing was running its own scam with us building them up. So we've fallen for just about all of their tricks, and now we're at the end of the line. We can't fall for their tricks anymore. We have to wake up to the fact that we have enemies.
Yeah.
And that we have friends. And objectively, truthfully, articulating friends and enemies is the key to everything now.
Exactly. And so you have to make new friends, and you have to recognize actual enemies, and you shouldn't confuse these things. Somebody people they misidentify, what's a friend, what's an enemy, and it's like, this is so much communist subversion had the aim of destroying interpersonal relationships. I mean, you see this stuff on TikTok all the time, when they're just they find every way to get people fighting. Now it's like this Gen Z versus the boomers, or Gen Z versus the previous generation. Make the
word boomer into a sneer word,
Yeah, because all these boomers, they own houses because they worked for decades, and yes, it may have been cheaper
when you're 60, back then, but you'll own a house too, honey.
Yeah, so it's like yeah. So people were disciplined, and they had to. Happen. Yeah, and they had to be disciplined for decades, not overspend, not do anything stupid, follow the laws, don't get in trouble, and it's like your whole life as you know it can be over.
Dope.
Yeah, your whole life as you know it can be over in a very short amount of time. I mean, watch some real good police channels on YouTube just to get a sense of the reality on the ground, how people actually ruin their lives in a moment, or even sometimes even systematically. They self-sabotage like crazy, and it's this behavior that people exhibit. But then it's like, oh, these boomers own houses and I don't, so let's hate the boomers, or let's steal the houses from the boomers and let's take their money. I mean, eventually somebody's coming after you. Somebody's gonna, the next generation will be around, and the next generation will be told, well, the previous generation, they're a bunch of idiots, and we should take their money, and they should get out of the way. It's like, where does it end? Like. And I asked this question yesterday to the audience, how many, because I was comparing Europe to the United States, and I said that Europe has a lot of style, because it's different countries here, and all these languages, and all the art, and all the, the nice, neat little stuff, but we have a lot of style, but we lack substance. And by lacking substance, I mean, ask yourself, how many people are really close to you? How many people do you really like, do you really trust, and they really like you and they really trust you? people you love to spend time with, even though they have flaws, even though this and that and the other. But how many people you're really close with? There's 500 plus million people in the European Union or something like that. But how many people are you close with? 2, 1, 3?
People are more isolated today. Yeah, to have a friend, you got to be a friend, and a
Yeah.
lot of people don't know what that means anymore.
It's a
They really
skill, and
don't.
it's really it's a skill set. And in Germany is a very complicated place because of all the history. And I don't just mean the 20th century. There's a much longer history of war after war after war, and no real progress in many areas. And so Germany is especially hard when it comes to interpersonal relationships. But we understand a lot more about this now, so we have tools to fix it. And despite the frustrations you may have experienced in your life, parents, teachers, other kids, then other adults, and at the workplace, but still you have to acquire and improve your skill set in making friends and communicating with them and actually providing value without getting exploited by someone, but providing something of value, and then just find people that you truly click with. Something that goes a really, really long way. I mean, so many people feel isolated and they feel lonely, even though they're surrounded by just hordes of people, right? I mean, we talk. This is like in Sweden. I mean, Sweden was destroyed by communism. I mean, they used to be. There was this one television show. I think Ed O'Neill said this in a popular sitcom. He said that about the Swedes. You used to be Vikings. Now it's all about socialism and seasonal depression or something like that. It's like socialism. Socialism has destroyed so much of Europe, and now I think Sweden has the most single person households in all of Europe. So
Really?
yeah, so if they expect you in Sweden, apparently when you turn 18, they expect you to move out, get yourself an apartment, but most people they end up alone. They remain alone in their apartment. There's a single person household. And it's like
That's
Sweden.
tragic.
Yeah, it's like stuff that happened in Sweden decades ago popped up in Germany maybe a decade or so later. So my
I
sneaking
think
suspicion is that
feminism has a lot to do with this breakup of people not forming families.
yeah, it's like it's
I
like it's
really
like
think it
almost
does.
it's almost like parts of Europe are like a sandbox testing environment to implement things that will destroy a population. So if something works in a negative way in Sweden, you can introduce it slowly in other countries, and
Yeah.
eventually you can try that stuff in the United States. And I said that in the show yesterday. When I look at some of these leftists in America. Especially in the cities, leftists in the big cities, it feels more European than American. It's a lot of
Well,
style. I
America,
give it to them.
yeah,
It's a lot of style. I
they've
mean, it's
been.
like, of course, you don't have to wear the clothes of a Southerner every day in your life. You don't have to drink exactly the same booze as someone from the South. You don't have to have the exact same drawl, and I love drawls, by the way. I adore drawls. I adore all kinds of accents. But you don't have to have the exact same style. You can have your style, but there needs to be more substance. And it's like this European problem that now pops up in America more and more and more. That's all about
Mm,
style, and there's no substance anymore. So you
style
have
over substance.
the cool clothing, and you listen to the cool music, and you've been to the concert, and you have a collection of plastic stuff in your at your wall, and you're into all the games, all the movies, all the television shows, but you're lonely, or you're not connecting with people, or you're not really connecting with people, and you never
Yeah,
form these.
commitment phobia I found with the younger generation. They're phobic about commitments. They want their freedom. They have some dreams about how their life's going to be, and it's not realistic because we need people, we need family. But anyway, Alex, it's we've now gone 2 hours almost, so I think we've come to the end. So I want to thank the audience for joining us. I'm Jeff Nyquist. My co-host has been Alex Benesch. I'm in the U.S., he's in Germany, and we've been discussing friends and enemies and how it works in the real world. So thanks for joining us.